This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And you have landed right here on Creep Street. Welcome to the Creep Street Podcast. Of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. Also on our Facebook, we have a little forum called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page. We like to daily interact with our listeners. Our listeners will post memes, funny stories, or scary stories, or just chat.
Oh, yeah.
So anyone's welcome to join that. Just click the Let Me In button. One of us will let you in. And of course, if once a week is just not enough.
And I need you to take a long, cold look in the mirror.
Right.
And have the balls, the audacity to say to yourself that once a week is enough, because it's not.
It's not.
It is simply not.
It's like thinking you can just go without breathing.
Right.
You can go for a little bit, but eventually you need a gasp of air. You need your Creep Street. And let me tell you, I've not met anyone who can hold their breath a week.
Oh, no.
And so hop on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast where we have all sorts of goodies. But Maureen, we are diving into a Hall of Famer, I'd say.
A big one. This is a banger. This is a, what's another word?
An American classic?
This is an American classic, literally, and I'm excited.
I'm excited too, Maureen.
Today, we are talking about Lizzie Borden, The Murders.
Ooh. And in case you're wondering why we gave it that title,
yeah,
it's because next week we'll be doing Lizzie Borden, The Haunting.
Because there is a lot of information and a lot of stories out there. Is there a possible curse involved here? Are there still ghosts to this day haunting the halls of Lizzie Borden's former home?
Absolutely. Damn it, I've been gabbing long enough, Maureen. What are those sources?
We've got some great sources today. One is a fantastic YouTube series by our favorite Stephanie Harlow about Lizzie Borden. Highly recommend you check that out. One source I'll save to the end, just because I don't want to give anything away in the title, but it is from Smithsonian Magazine. And then we have two great books. One is called One August Morning, The True Story of Lizzie Borden by Troy Taylor. And another is called The Life and Trial of Lizzie Borden by Charles River Editors.
Well, hot diggity damn.
So this story, for those who may not know, is a huge, famous story about a murder, or two murders, I should say, that took place back in 1892 in Fall River, Massachusetts. I'm sure many of you have heard the old rhyme that goes, Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
Wow.
Now, this is not true.
Right, not true. Bo's going to dispel some of that.
But that is how you may know about Miss Lizzie Borden.
Oh, yeah. Like we said, this is an American classic.
Yes.
Like,
this was the OJ case of its day.
Absolutely. It was like that. It was sensational.
Oh, it was huge. It was famous all around the world, and everyone knew about Lizzie Borden, and what a crazy, crazy story it is. And I'm excited to talk about it with all of you today. Now, Lizzie Borden's family, her paternal line at least, her father's name was Andrew, and Andrew's family made their fortune in cotton mills, but Andrew's family specifically, like his immediate family, wasn't actually doing so great financially.
Oh, okay.
So Andrew Borden's cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff, they were living the high life. They were living on the hill in Fall River, Massachusetts, which is the bougie, the luxurious area of town.
Okay.
Andrew Borden was not living that lifestyle. But that didn't hold him down. That didn't hold him back.
No, ma'am.
He was a girl boss.
He was.
In his own right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And he gained his own wealth on his own accord. He was an undertaker at one point, but he really got his wealth by investing in manufacturing and selling furniture. He directed several textile mills and owned property that he rented out.
Wow, okay.
By the time of his death, he was worth about $10 million in today's money.
Oh, wow.
So he was doing well.
He's doing very well.
He was doing well. However, he was kind of a Scrooge.
Okay.
A Scrooge McDuck. Okay?
All right.
He kind of hoarded his money. He was known as a no-nonsense guy, had no sense of humor, and he absolutely lived well below his means. And I guess some could say that's how you get so rich, but to each his own, I guess.
Right. But you also don't have to be a dick about it.
You don't have to be a dick about it, and it seems like he might have been a little bit of a dick about it. So Andrew Borden married Sarah Anthony Morris on Christmas in 1845, and their daughter Emma was born about 5 years after that, and Emma and Sarah were very, very close. And Sarah, Mrs. Borden, taught Emma how to take care of her little sister, Alice. Now, unfortunately, Alice Borden died right before her second birthday from an illness that is currently treatable, but at the time was not treatable. And about 4 years after that, Lizzie Andrew Borden herself, the one and only, was born. Now, just about 2 years after Lizzie was born, Sarah herself passed away. On March 26, 1863, Sarah died of uterine congestion and spinal disease, which woof. I mean, I don't really know what that means or what that is, but it sounds bad. It sounds painful and it sounds rough and it sounds 1800s.
Uterine congestion. I wonder if that's a thing that's still around today. We just have a different
name for it, and it's like, yeah, I don't know, man.
But that, I don't know. Yeah, that sounds...
Oof.
That sounds rough.
But on Sarah's deathbed, she made Emma promise to always look after baby Lizzie. And Emma took this role very, very seriously. And from then on, she was really the sole care provider or the main care provider. So at this point, Lizzie was about 2 years old and her older sister Emma was about 12 years old. Okay. So this is a very young age for Emma to all of a sudden be kind of the main caretaker for Lizzie. But that is what happened because dads back then were in Victorian times or the Gilded Age, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Dads were wildin'.
Dads were just out there being dads.
They were straight up dadding.
But usually not at home.
But not at home. They were busy being dads to their businesses.
Yes.
And Andrew Borden was no exception to this rule. So Emma Borden starts being kind of the main caretaker for Lizzie. But then on June 6th, 1865, so a couple years after Andrew Borden's first wife passed away, Andrew Borden married Abby Durfee Gray, who was 37 years old. This was an old, decrepit, dried out woman.
37?
At the time.
Wow. How old was he at the time?
He was only a little bit older than her at this point. He wasn't much older, but still at the time, ooh,
my God.
If you're 37
yeah,
and you are just now getting married,
pick out a coffin.
You are crazy, honey. And that is exactly what happened. She wasn't actually crazy, but she was just, that was an old age for a woman to get married at the time.
Right. And Lizzie was a wee babe at this time,
right? So this probably really seemed like a great opportunity for Abby because she was like, oh my gosh, I'm marrying into this family and I'm gaining 2 daughters, especially
Right.
one daughter who is very young still.
Right.
So can really kind of have a little bit more of that mother-daughter type relationship.
Exactly.
Not saying that she herself couldn't have had kids anymore, but this was really a marriage of convenience rather than a love connection.
Right.
So they were married because Abby needed a husband and Andrew needed a wife. You know, his wife had passed away. He had already had like the great love of his life. So this was really just a marriage of convenience because these 2 people both needed to be married. Now, in a lot of TV shows and movies and things like that, Abby Borden, Lizzie's stepmother, is kind of portrayed as an evil stepmother. Now, that's probably not the case. That's probably not what was actually going on. It seemed like Abby wanted to be more maternal to the 2 girls, but Emma and Lizzie, but especially Emma, weren't having it.
Okay.
They didn't really want that relationship, or they weren't as into the relationship. Lizzie, of course, at this age was really young, so probably Emma was kind of convincing her
Right.
not to be as into Abby.
I'm sure.
And just in general, if you've seen there's a bunch of different movies and TV shows about Lizzie Borden, they're all pretty much incorrect.
They're all pretty much fictionalized versions of...
Right, and that's okay. So Andrew, Emma, Lizzie, and Abby Borden, they all lived in this house on 2nd Street. Now, this house used to be a duplex, but they moved into it and used it as a single family home. But because it used to be a duplex and because Andrew is a little bit of a cheapskate, the house was in a very weird layout. They kind of shared all of the living quarters on the 1st floor, but if you
Right.
wanted to go to certain rooms on the 2nd floor, you'd have to walk up 1 flight of stairs, and if you wanted to get to other rooms on the 2nd floor, you'd have to walk up a different flight of stairs.
And I'm sure in a roundabout way that doesn't help the division in the family.
Exactly.
Because, like, if you're living in a place that was originally meant for separate families,
Right.
in a weird way, it's only you're going to adapt to your surroundings in a weird way, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So as I said before, the Borden family were living way below their means. But let's be clear here, they were by no means living in poverty. They just weren't living as well as Lizzie and Emma would like.
Ah, okay.
See, as I mentioned before, the rest of their family, the rest of the Borden family, the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, things like that, they were all living up on the hill, which was the nice area of town, and that's where they wanted to be as well. But Andrew just didn't want to spend the money on it, didn't think it was worth it, he thought it was frivolous. But it wasn't just the house that they were living in, it really hindered Emma and Lizzie's social life as well. They weren't able to go to these balls, these parties, or have these interactions with people with their peers that the rest of their cousins and stuff were able to do. So their only social time really was at church.
Right. And they also really weren't allowed to work either because
of the time.
Because of the times and because the family was well off in a way. So, like, they kind of were like, they couldn't even make friends by having a fucking job.
Exactly, because at their station, they weren't poor enough where they would be a housekeeper or maid or something like that. Not that you had to be extremely poor for that job, but just they made too much money to have that kind of a job.
Exactly.
Because in the Victorian era / the Gilded Age, status and behavior were very, very linked, and they were very strict.
Absolutely.
Lizzie was described as an average student at school, but she was considered to also be aloof and often moody. She wasn't afraid to speak negatively about her stepmother as well, so people around town kind of knew how she felt about her stepmother.
Okay. All right. So she could talk the talk, Miss Lizzie.
That's right. So Lizzie used to call Abby mother, but Emma never called Abby mother. Lizzie would eventually call Abby Mrs. Borden or Mrs. B, whereas Emma just called her Abby, which was very disrespectful at the time.
Wow. Okay.
Yikes.
I mean, did they ever say what their beef with her was?
Well, their beef with her was one thing that they really were upset about was just, I think, Emma just didn't want another mom, I think was part of it. But also they were a little jealous of some of the things that Abby would get that Emma and Lizzie wouldn't.
Because I'm sure Papa Bear sprinkled a little of that money on Abby.
Right. But the thing is, he sprinkled a little bit on Emma and Lizzie too. I think they were just a little entitled, to be honest.
Okay.
He would get them. They still had nice clothes.
Right.
Lizzie actually had a shoplifting habit.
Oh, that's right.
That everyone in town knew that if Lizzie stole something from your store, just write it down, make a note of it, and that Andrew Borden later on would pay for everything that Lizzie stole.
So it's also just kind of a little fucking embarrassing.
So embarrassing.
Knowing that you're grown ass, because this by now we're saying she's a fucking adult. But this was something, didn't it? It was well into adulthood. She kind of had that.
Oh, she did this up until the murders.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's probably adds an extra layer of like.
Right. Which is just so weird. I don't know if she knew that her dad was just paying everyone back or not. I don't know.
Right. And maybe because of how isolated she felt, it was a way of just feeling alive or something.
Yeah, exactly. Being in control of something or feeling like you were doing a little something.
Right.
You know? But there was one thing that happened, which was Abby's family. It's kind of a long story, but essentially what happened was Abby's family was living in this house and the house was going to be sold, and the house being sold would kind of leave these members of Abby's family homeless, essentially.
Okay.
So Andrew Borden bought that house for Abby's family and put it in Abby's name. Essentially, he bought Abby a house. Even though Abby wasn't living in the house or using the house, he bought Abby a house. And that pissed Emma and Lizzie off so bad that he would do this.
All right.
And that, I believe, is why Lizzie would not call Abby Borden mother anymore.
Okay.
That's why she switched to Mother or Mrs. B. But the fucked up thing is that Andrew bought Lizzie and Emma a house too. They just weren't allowed to live in it because of the time. Women weren't allowed to just live on their own.
Oh, okay. I see
While their parents were alive. So they rented out the house and they got money from renting out the house from their tenants. And also they eventually sold the house back to Andrew Borden and got the money. They each got like $2,500 out of it, which was $2,500 at that time.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of a baller move.
Well, I mean, it's just like insane. They just, that they felt like Abby was getting treated much better when it was like her family was in dire straits and really needed help. But Emma and Lizzie just really hated that.
Right.
But there was another person living in the house as well. That person's name was Bridget Sullivan. She was the maid for the family, but the family called her Maggie because a former maid of the house was called Maggie, and they just didn't want to be bothered by learning a new name.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
So these people are motherfuckers.
So these are just kind of like
assholes.
So they're just all around just kind of shit people.
Right. And so like a lot of this, in a lot of stories about Lizzie Borden, they really try to humanize her. To a degree, that's true. But at the same time, I think she was also kind of a shithead.
Yeah.
Sorry to put it so bluntly, folks.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So the whole family, I'm not on board with. Just the fact that they're calling Bridget Maggie instead of Bridget. It's like, are you actually joking?
It's a what a
like,
joke.
What the hell? Anyway, so I'm going to call her Bridget. I'm not going to call her Maggie. We're going to call her Bridget. So Bridget, she said that she never really heard the family raise their voices in the house, but she said that the tense atmosphere in the house was so bad that she tried to leave the job a few times, but Abby Borden always talked her back into staying by giving her money out of her own pocket, probably because Bridget didn't actually hate Abby like Emma and Lizzie did.
Right.
So she wanted someone around that actually would be okay talking to her and just being around.
Right. Oh, God.
So on June 24th, 1891, the Borden house was broken into in broad daylight while Abby, Lizzie, Emma, and Bridget were all home. But none of them said that they saw or heard anything. all the things that were stolen were from Andrew and Abby's bedroom. And what was stolen out of there were mainly things that belonged to Abby. I believe a gold watch was stolen of hers, as well as some cash and some just gold was stolen.
Sounds a little suspicious.
Exactly. Sounds very suspicious.
So someone breaks in, but no one sees it, but only one person's shit really gets stolen. So
yeah. Now, the police were called, but only after, I believe it was like a week after the investigation, Andrew Borden called the investigation off. Interesting. And from then on, he always kept his bedroom door locked. However, he kept the key to his bedroom door in plain sight on the mantle in the living room. I think is kind of a dare.
Yeah, clearly the investigation it was looking like
it had to have been Lizzie, probably.
Lizzie, and to spare the family the scandal.
Right.
Called off okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then leaves as like a dare. That's absolutely what it was.
Right. I mean, that hasn't been confirmed. Obviously, there's no way to confirm that, but that's really what it sounds like.
Okay.
To me. But even though this happened, and it seems like, in my opinion, Lizzie was the one that stole from Andrew and Abby's room, Lizzie and her father were always pretty close. Like, she was kind of like the son that he never had. Like, they went fishing together and did things like that, kind of like more male-ish, more boyish things like that.
Okay, a little locker room talk.
A little bit of locker room talk, I think, possibly.
All right.
And Lizzie actually gave him a gold ring that he wore on his finger. He wore it all the time, and he never took it off. So it's kind of this weird dichotomy between her kind of resenting her father, but also loving her father at the same time, and being so resentful of her stepmother. And Emma kind of felt the same way. In fact, Emma and Lizzie had stopped eating with the family and took their meals in their rooms, which was very, very uncommon for the time. Now, they had a barn on their property. I don't think it was like a huge property. It's probably like a garage or something. But
right.
at the
Well,
time,
as we know, he was notoriously frugal with his money, so I can't imagine it was huge.
Exactly. But they did have a barn, and there were a bunch of pigeons that were living in the barn that Lizzie was taking care of. Now, one day, Andrew went in there and he either twisted off or cut off all of the heads of these pigeons and brought them inside for Bridget to make a stew out of. Now, this must have absolutely infuriated Lizzie.
This just shows you all the family is kind of fucking assholes.
Oh, absolutely. The whole family.
That's fucking...
Yeah.
Especially if, that's their pets that they take care...
That she really cares of.
And then you expect them to fucking eat them?
Yeah. And apparently he did it because these kids in town were, throwing rocks at the windows to try to get to the birds or some dumb shit like that. So, he probably wasn't doing it just to be an asshole to Lizzie. He was doing it because he didn't want these kids breaking his windows.
Turn the kids into a fucking stew.
Yeah, seriously. I agree with that. Kid stew.
Of course, we do not condone kid stew.
Yeah. Speaking of fucked up food, we got that coming up.
Uh-oh, okay.
So a few days before the murders, which we're going to get to, don't worry, the whole house started feeling very sick. The whole house was vomiting and just felt really, really terrible. So much so that Abby went to the doctor and thought that all of them had been poisoned, possibly by the baker's bread. But the doctor said, no, don't worry about it. It probably was just something you ate. Now, they had been eating leftover swordfish, so I'm on board with the whole it was food poisoning situation.
You're telling me leftover swordfish doesn't go down so easy sometimes?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Of all the things, leftover swordfish.
Right, and keep in mind, leftover isn't like how we think of leftovers, they didn't have a refrigerator. So this was just some old swordfish that had just been sitting out in the summertime. It's hot as hell. It's probably in the 90s.
Ugh.
And they're just eating this swordfish. So it's yeah, I bet that's what got you sick.
Yeah.
But just keep that in mind, because maybe not. On August 2nd, Lizzie went to go buy prussic acid, which she said was going to be used to clean a sealskin cape she had. Once again, she has a sealskin cape. Hello, she's not poor.
Right.
So she wanted to buy some acid to clean her cape to kill some moths, which apparently this was a thing that people would do at the time. But the pharmacist wouldn't sell it to her, saying that it was a very dangerous substance and that only the doctor would prescribe it to her. So she left and did not have any prussic prussic acid. What matters to our story is it seems like she wanted to buy a substance that could be used as a poison, but she was turned away. We'll see if that matters as we go on. Now, on August 3rd, John Morse, who was Sarah Borden's brother, Andrew Borden's first wife, Lizzie and Emma's mother's brother, so their uncle, just kind of came over to visit, and he came and stayed at the house. Now, that same night, August 3rd, Lizzie went to go visit her friend Alice Russell. She went over to Alice Russell's house to hang out, and Lizzie told Alice that she thought everyone had gotten sick in her family from either the baker's bread, possibly thinking that it was poisoned. And Lizzie was telling Alice about how everyone in the family was sick and not really knowing what it was. And Lizzie mentioned that maybe it was the baker's bread that got them sick. And Alice was like, no, everyone in town eats the baker's bread, so I don't think it's that. And then Lizzie was like, well, I wonder, maybe someone's poisoning the milk because they got their milk dropped off every morning at 4 a.m.
Right.
And she's thinking maybe someone poisoned the milk. And Alice is like, oh, I don't know. Then Lizzie says that she has been afraid that someone is going to try and hurt her father.
Okay.
She said that she overheard conflicts between him and a few of his different business associates lately, and that the barn had been broken into twice, and that the house had been broken into once in broad daylight, and how worried she was about all of this, saying that she was worried someone was trying to get to her father. So now here we are, the dreaded day. The very day.
Okay.
August 4th.
Buckle up, Creep Street.
That morning, John Morse, Emma and Lizzie's uncle, he said that he woke up at around 6 a.m., followed shortly by Andrew and Abby. They all had breakfast together, some mutton. Yikes. What a breakfast.
What a breakfast.
Some mutton. And I also think that it's just this mutton that they just kind of have going on the stove all the time. Oh, just heinous. Oh, God. Anyway. So it was a little bit before 9 a.m. when John left, and Andrew followed John to the door and locked the door behind him. Bridget woke up at about 6:30 a.m. and began cleaning the kitchen. Bridget also was not feeling well. She also had food poisoning or whatever this was that all of them had too. So she got up a little bit later, but still 6:30 a.m. and began cleaning. Then Lizzie came down a little bit before 9 a.m., so she just missed her uncle, and she came down and got some coffee. And when Lizzie was down there getting some coffee, Bridget got sick and ran out the back door to go throw up in the backyard. And when she came back inside, 10 or 15 minutes later, whatever, she came back in, she locked the back door, and Lizzie was just not there. She, was somewhere else in the house.
Okay.
Also, I forgot to mention, Emma was out of town now. Emma was visiting a friend who was a dressmaker, I believe, and she was getting some dresses made. She wasn't too far away, but she was out of town.
Okay.
So at this point, it's a little after 9 a.m. And Bridget gets some window cleaning supplies because Abby told her, these windows are filthy. I need you to clean the windows inside and out today. So Bridget gets some window cleaning supplies and walks outside, and there she sees Lizzie. And Lizzie asks her if she's going to be cleaning the windows. And Bridget says yes, and that Lizzie doesn't have to lock the door because she'll be there and she can just see the door. But if Lizzie feels more comfortable, she can lock the door, and that Bridget can just knock to be let back in the house. This family really fucking cared if their doors were locked or not.
Okay.
Clearly. They were all about, especially after this break-in that they had, they were all about keeping their doors locked at all goddamn times.
Right.
So Bridget starts cleaning the windows, and then after a little while, when she was done with the exterior windows, she came back in and she locked the back door. She then began cleaning the inside windows, and it was at that time that Andrew Borden started to try to get back in the house. But he couldn't get back in the house because the door latches were latched. So his keys weren't enough to let him in the house because there was also those latches that are on the doors that you kind of pull to have it like an extra lock on your house, apparently. But you can only unlock it from the inside.
Right.
So Andrew's trying to get in the house, but he can't. So Bridget runs to the door, and she is trying to let Andrew Borden in, but she's having trouble because the latches are stuck. So she's getting frustrated, and then she could hear Lizzie laughing at the top of the stairs. which she thought she was a little strange, like that Lizzie was laughing at Bridget and Andrew not being able to open the door.
And at this moment, Andrew's outside trying to get in.
Yes, he is. I didn't mention that before. I'm sorry. He had left a little bit earlier to go to work, but he came back because he wasn't feeling well.
Okay.
Because Andrew Borden would come home every day to have lunch or whatever, but that day he came home earlier than he usually would because he wasn't feeling well.
Okay.
Because of this goddamn swordfish.
Right.
So Lizzie and Andrew talk briefly in the sitting room for a little while. Andrew asks Lizzie where Abby is, and Lizzie says that Abby got a note earlier in the day saying that she needed to go help a sick friend. So Andrew accepts this and says that's fine, and he decides to take a little nap on the sofa. Lizzie then goes up to Bridget and she asks Bridget if she is going to go out for the day or not. And Bridget says maybe. She's not really sure. She's still not feeling well because she ate fucked up swordfish.
Right.
Whatever. Lizzie's like, oh, okay, that's fine. But you know what? There's a sale at Sargent's, so you should really go there today. And like, you have time to go.
Sounds like Lizzie's trying to get people out of the house.
Yeah. And Bridget is like, okay, like, no, I'm really not feeling well. And she actually decides to go upstairs and have a little bit of a rest. Now, at this point, it's 11 a.m. She says that once she got up to her room, she heard town square clock chime, that it was 11 o'clock. But she didn't fall asleep, though. She was just up there, just resting, just laying down. And in her bedroom, which was on the loft room, the attic room of the house, she said that she could usually hear doors opening and doors closing and things like that, but at this point, she didn't hear anything.
Okay.
Until 10 or 15 minutes later, Lizzie cries out, Maggie, come quick. Father is dead. Someone has come in and killed him.
Oh boy.
Yikes. So Bridget, of course, runs downstairs and sees the dead body of Andrew Borden laying on the sofa in the sitting room. Lizzie then tells Bridget to go out and get a doctor. This is almost like comical that they're asking for a doctor.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, this man is like clearly dead.
And it's like, I guess that would be their version of 911, because if we saw the same thing, you'd still call.
Because someone still has to come out and like call that the person is dead and things like that. So a doctor did need to be there, but it's just, I just think it's kind of weird.
You're going to make it.
Yeah. Their family doctor lived across the street, but he wasn't home. So Bridget ran back across the street to the Borden house. And Bridget's like, Lizzie, what happened? Where were you? I'm sure that I locked the back door when I came back inside. And Lizzie said that she was outside in the barn and that she heard a groan from inside. And that's what brought her back in. But Bridget didn't hear anything.
Okay, yeah.
So a little strange. Lizzie then tells Bridget to go run out to Alice Russell's house. Alice Russell is the friend that Lizzie was with the day before. The one who she told that her friend that she was worried that her father was in danger. So Lizzie's like, go to Alice Russell's house, bring her back here. I don't want to be alone in the house. But Bridget right then is with her in the house.
Right.
Yes. And also there was another doctor that I believe lived on the other side of the house to them, and there was a doctor that lived behind them, I believe, but both of those doctors were Catholic.
Okay, very weird.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that played into it too. I didn't realize they were a Protestant family or like.
Oh yeah.
I hadn't. So that's interesting. It's interesting to know that that's just interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of nativism going on here where they didn't trust the new immigrants that were coming. There were a lot of Irish immigrants. There were a lot of Portuguese immigrants coming in, and the upper crust of society were these WASPs, these Protestant people. So they weren't on board with this. But then Adelaide Churchill, the next door neighbor, she was just sitting there looking out her window and saw Bridget running back and forth between the two houses looking stressed. So Adelaide yells out to Lizzie, because Lizzie was just standing in the doorway at this point while Bridget was running out to get Alice Russell. And she yells out to Lizzie, what's wrong? And Lizzie's like, come here quick. So Adelaide gets to the Borden home and Lizzie says what happened, and Adelaide sees Andrew Borden's dead body and once again asks Lizzie, where were you? And Lizzie says that she went out to the barn to look for some iron, and that's kind of all she says. But she did say the same thing.
To pump?
Yeah, she wanted to pump some iron.
She was looking for some iron to pump?
Pump. No, I think later on she said she was fixing a screen is something that was going on. I don't know.
Okay.
But she said she was looking for iron. But she did say the same thing about Abby being called away to take care of a sick friend, and that she was afraid that something bad was going to happen to her father because of her father's reputation. But she also says that she thinks she might have heard Mrs. Borden come back in the house, and that Mrs. Borden might actually be in the house, meaning Abby Borden, which is weird, which is like, so why are you calling out to bring all these other people in? And also, wouldn't you think that Abby Borden would hear the screaming if she was around?
That's the other thing, because she called out to Bridget, who was asleep. So even if Abby was like in a deep nap or something,
she would have heard.
Yeah.
And also, if you think that she's there, why don't you just go up and look for her or call out to her?
Right.
It's very weird. But Lizzie keeps saying that they need a doctor, so Adelaide runs out to get a doctor, and Dr. Bowen came. Dr. Bowen was the doctor that lived across the street. I don't know where she found him, but she found him somewhere. And he was absolutely shocked, of course, when he saw Andrew Borden's body.
And if you've seen photos, it's
grim.
It's not pretty.
No, we won't share it on our social media because I don't even know if we can.
Right.
But you can look it up. It's very easy to find these photos, and it's gruesome.
So we'll let you know before we get into that, in case you're eating lunch while you're listening to this.
Right. So Dr. Bowen, he comes in there, he's shocked, and he feels for a pulse, which once again is insane, but I guess you have to as a doctor if you're going to call a death. And he noticed that the body was still warm, but there was no pulse. And he did declare him dead. So Dr. Bowen asks Lizzie, like everyone else, where were you? How did this happen? And Lizzie says she was in the barn looking for some iron. To pump. And that also she thought that one of her father's tenants wanted him dead. Then Dr. Bowen leaves and says that he'll send a telegram to Emma and that he'll be back. Then Alice, Lizzie's friend, comes over and is talking with Lizzie and is just like doting on her friend. And Lizzie keeps saying how she wishes someone would go and look for Abby. Once again, this is weird. Like, why don't you look for her yourself?
Why don't you fucking look for Abby?
Also, why don't you just yell out to Abby? This house isn't that big.
Right.
So it's like, it just is weird. So both Mrs. Churchill and Bridget didn't want to go looking for Abby, but they did say that they would. I think they're afraid. They don't want to just be wandering around this house. Like, is the murderer still in the house hiding somewhere? I don't know. So they're afraid, but they're like, fine, we'll go look. They walk up the stairs and they find Abby laying completely face down, attacked from the back. Now, I'm going to describe how their murders here. If you're eating lunch, maybe just fast forward like 10 seconds. But compared to some other things that we've talked about on Creep Street, you're going to be okay. It's okay.
I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as Gainesville Ripper. I think Gainesville has been the worst so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So Andrew had 10 to 11 strikes to his face, all for the most part on the left side of his face. One of his eyeballs was cut in half, and his nose was completely obliterated. He was fully unrecognizable, while Abby's wounds were all to the back of her head, which lends itself to her being attacked from the back while she didn't know that the attack was coming. The murders were probably about an hour and a half apart based on a few different things, but partially based on how Abby's blood was dark and already congealing, while Andrew himself was still bleeding. So at this point, Alice, Lizzie's friend, is sitting with Lizzie and, of course, asks the question, where were you? And Lizzie says that she was looking for some iron or tin to fix a screen. And at one point, Alice leans forward to undo the collar on Lizzie's dress to give her some air, but Lizzie stops her and says, no, I'm not going to faint. Just keep that in mind.
Also, just kind of funny that they expected them to faint.
Right, exactly.
And that's a theme you'll see throughout this whole thing is like, it was just de facto then, well, damn it, the woman's supposed to faint.
Exactly. They just expect that to happen. Like, women were just these delicate flowers that needed to be doted on so fully that they could not be trusted to hold it together through any sort of hardship.
Isn't there even that piece of furniture that's called like a swooning?
Yeah. And that's partially too because of like women wearing corsets that were really tight too.
That's
possibly.
true. Swooning not because of something awful or just swooning because they couldn't fucking breathe in those corsets.
Right. And not all, I know some people are like against it when people say corsets were bad because they weren't all bad. Like corsets could be fine. And some people wear corsets today even sometimes too, and they can be fine. Right. Wearing a corset itself isn't necessarily bad for you.
I see.
Now then, Lizzie goes upstairs and she changes into a different dress. She changes into a pink wrap dress, whereas before she was wearing a light blue gingham pattern dress.
Okay,
Just
costume change.
A costume change, just remember that. Let that color your thinking, possibly. Then the police arrive. They arrive and they were so concerned and taken aback by the crime scene. They were concerned by how vicious the attacks were, and they also were confused about how the blood was mainly just on the bodies of the victims. The blood wasn't like splattered throughout the whole room necessarily.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So the police are there, and Lizzie goes up to the police and she's like, hey, there's a bowl of bloody rags soaking in the cellar, but don't worry about it. I'm just on my period. And they're all like, what? Huh? What? Huh? What? Okay. And they just never ask about this bowl of bloody rags ever again.
Okay.
Because they are, I think, just so shocked by the fact that Lizzie would even talk about her time of the month with them.
Right.
That they can't even, it was just so unheard of to talk about.
Right.
And it was so improper for them to try to be involved with that in any way that they just believed her at face value and didn't say anything. Or didn't check anything or anything like that. They didn't check this bowl of bloody rags. To be fair, a doctor was there. Doctor came by and she actually was on her period. So
that part was legit. Okay.
So she was on her period. But then the police start asking some questions, not about the bowl of bloody rags, but just in general. And they're like, hey, where were you? What's going on? Just like everyone else is asked. And Lizzie says she was inside preparing to work on some fishing lures or some shit.
She's Ron Swanson.
She was working on some fishing lures for an upcoming fishing trip, and she went out to the barn to find some iron to make some sinkers.
And to pump,
of course. She was walking to the barn when she saw a pear tree that's in their backyard had 3 ripe, perfect-looking pears right below the tree.
God damn.
So she gets these 3 pears, she goes up to the loft of the barn, and she sits up there for like 20 or 30 minutes just eating some pears.
Macking on pears for straight up 30 minutes. Whew.
She ate 3 pears in 30 minutes, kind of a long time, and she's just sitting in the loft of the barn. Now, keep in mind, this is August in Massachusetts. It's really hot.
Yeah.
It's like 90 plus degrees, so it's probably like 100 plus degrees in this barn.
Right. It's probably humid, too, because, Massachusetts it's probably humid.
And she's up in the barn as well, so it's especially hot and muggy. So it's like weird that she would sit there when she could just sit beneath a pear tree, or she could sit inside. Not that they had air conditioning or anything, but it would be cooler.
Right. And it's not like back then gals wore tank tops and flip-flops like they do today.
Sleeves.
She's probably wearing long-ass cotton and wool and clothing.
Yeah, but she said she was just eating these pears up in the barn for about 20 to 30 minutes before she started rifling around looking for some iron. She said that she then heard a groan and a scraping noise. She ran out of the barn to see what was going on, and she saw that the back door into the house was wide open. Now, the police thought she was acting very strangely because she was cold and distant and not panicking or crying at all. Now, this is kind of true, but also is kind of fucked up because you don't know how you're going to react when you walk into something that extremely traumatic.
Right. Absolutely. As damning as some of the evidence is, when it comes to the actual way someone, you can't really...
And they really just expected her to be panicking because she was a woman. They couldn't wrap their head around the fact that a woman could see something like this and not be absolutely shaken to her core. So it's just worth noting, but her reaction doesn't necessarily mean anything. Just want to remember that. But the police thought that it was odd. And when the police referred to Abby Borden as Lizzie's mother, Lizzie was very quick to correct them.
Ruh-roh.
That was not her mother. That her mother had died when she was very young, and that woman was her stepmother. Kind of weird. I mean, true, but kind of weird to be correcting the police about it like that at this time.
Exactly.
And it's not like she was correcting them just being like, I want to make sure you have all the right information. It's more so she was correcting them like she was offended that Abby was referred to as her mother.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the police are still talking to Lizzie, and they ask Lizzie if there was anyone that wanted to hurt or to kill Andrew, her father. And Lizzie says no. But Alice, her friend, is standing right there listening. And Alice is like, well, no, Lizzie, that's not what you told me last night.
Yeah.
And Lizzie was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Well, I guess you're right. And told everything to the police that she had told Alice the night before. I'll just be upfront with you guys here. I think Lizzie committed this murder, these murders, I should say.
Right.
And I think she wanted Alice to be there for that moment so that it seemed like it was another person confirming that there was something going on with Andrew and that there was a reason, like, oh no, Lizzie had always been concerned about Andrew and having someone attacking him.
Okay, very interesting.
Like, that's why she purposely wanted Alice to be there so that Alice could say this.
Right.
And she did.
Wow. So if we go by that assumption, I mean, in a weird way, it was actually kind of masterful planning in a way.
And I think that's exactly what it was.
In a way that Alice didn't even realize she's helping Lizzie. It's not like she was in on it. It was literally she was played.
I think so.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Lizzie then tells the police she overheard a very heated conversation between Andrew and someone else the week before, but she had no idea who this guy was and that she thinks he was from out of town. She also said that she once saw a dark figure lurking around the house, but couldn't really elaborate any more than that.
Ooh, I feel like that's foreshadowing next week.
I think it might. The police then searched the house, including Lizzie's room and Bridget's room, but they found nothing. Now, Dr. Bowen was still there at this point, or he had returned, and he was dosing Lizzie with morphine because she was so upset, apparently. Or because he thought she was so upset, or she should be so upset.
Which is interesting, because at first they were like, she wasn't reacting the way they thought she should.
Right. Maybe just because maybe behind closed doors she was acting a little bit more upset. Maybe the doctor just assumed that she was upset and so wanted to give her morphine.
Right.
Maybe the doctor thought that she was in shock and wanted to give her morphine.
Maybe that's it. Maybe what they mistook as being cold and distant was actually like shock.
Right. But the police also checked the barn. But they thought it was strange that there were no footprints in the dust on the barn, what made it seem that no one had been in the barn for at least days.
Wow, okay.
Alice Russell then spends that night at the house to try to be a good friend to Lizzie so that she's not just there by herself. Well, I mean, Bridget is there, obviously, but Lizzie doesn't consider that to be another person, clearly, so whatever.
Right.
So Alice spends the night, and she actually spends the night in Abby and Andrew's bedroom. So this wasn't the room that Abby was found in, but it's still kind of creepy sleeping in the murder victim's bed that night. And by the way, the bodies of Andrew and Abby are just still laying on the living room floor.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why they don't take it to like a morgue or to the hospital or the police station or whatever. I don't know what like common practice was back then, but they literally were just still in the house. So a police officer was posted up outside of the house, and at about 8:30 p.m., Alice came down the stairs and went to the police officer to let them know that they were going to bed. Then Alice went back upstairs, and Lizzie is like, hey, I'm gonna go empty the toilet pan, gross, in the cellar. And Alice is like, oh, trying to be a good friend. She's like, I'll do it for you. Lizzie's like, no, I'm gonna do it. And Alice is like, okay, I'll come with you. And the police officer actually saw them, because of the lamp, go down into the cellar and then come back upstairs. But then 15 minutes later, Lizzie went back down to the cellar alone by herself and was seen crouching by the sink for about 1 or 2 minutes. And this was all happening while Alice was in the bath.
Okay.
The next morning, Alice found a huge club at the foot of her bed. Keep in mind, only Lizzie, Bridget, and Alice are in the house. There's a police officer posted up outside of the house. So someone in the house must have put this big club at the foot of Alice's bed.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think Alice thought that way, though. She thought someone had, broken in and done this.
Right.
I think that Lizzie was doing it, trying to get rid of Alice and scaring her.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. On August 6th, they had the funeral for Andrew and Abby Borden in the family home. After that, the police do a more thorough search of the home and ask Lizzie for the clothes she wore that day, and brings forward 3 items: a blouse, a patterned skirt, and a white undershirt. which does not match up with the blue gingham dress that Bridget and Mrs. Churchill said that they saw her wearing before.
Right, because then she swapped into that
pink wrap dress.
Right.
So on Sunday, I believe that's the next day, Alice sees Lizzie burning a blue garment in the fire. Lizzie says that she accidentally rubbed up on some paint, but Alice is like, what the fuck, this looks really bad. You should not have done that.
Right, even if you're done with the dress, there's other ways of disposing of the dress. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know if like people just would burn their old clothes.
Yeah.
Or if that was like especially weird or if that's normal. I don't really know, but that's what she was doing. She said she just got some paint on this old dress of hers, and so she burned it. The police asked Alice if all of the dresses that were in the house the day of the murder were still in the house, and Alice initially said yes, lying. But she eventually did come forward to the police and tell the truth and say that Lizzie did burn a dress.
Okay.
But on Monday, the day after the dress burning, the police came and they found a hatchet in the cellar with the handle broken off. The break in the wood seemed to be new, but the hatchet itself seemed to look very old and had like a white substance on it, like a white ashy substance.
Okay.
So the police questioned Lizzie again a little bit later on, and Lizzie said that at 10:45, Andrew came back to the house, but she keeps going back and forth between whether or not she was upstairs or downstairs. And she's also not making a lot of sense about the last time she saw Abby, her stepmother. She also says she has no idea who the note was from or who the sick friend was that Abby went to go see. And then Lizzie kind of apparently sees or understands that she's not doing very well, so she just keeps saying she doesn't know to a lot of the questions.
She's not doing well in terms of looking good.
Right.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah. And she kind of just keeps saying that she was in the kitchen, like before that she went out to go check out the pears out in the barn.
Right, and pump iron.
Which doesn't really make any sense with how she wouldn't be able to hear anything that was going on with Abby Borden being murdered. And she keeps saying that she thinks that it was either just an intruder of some kind or it was an enemy of Mr. Borden, Andrew Borden. But what I gotta say to that is, why would the murderer just kill Abby and Andrew? And why wouldn't the murderer kill Bridget and Lizzie as well if this murderer was just staying in the house, waiting that hour and a half between when Abby was murdered and when Andrew was murdered?
Because you would think if it was an enemy of her dad's, he would just kill him.
Right.
Or if they wanted the whole family dead, yeah, they'd kill the whole family. Like,
right.
What? Very weird.
And what did they do? Did they kill Abby and then just stay in the house for an hour and a half, hiding somewhere before killing Andrew? And why and how?
Right.
Like I said before, this isn't a huge house. It's not like there are a bunch of places to hide. So it wasn't long after this line of questioning that Lizzie Borden was officially arrested and brought to jail to await her trial. She really kept her cool a lot of the time, but she did apparently begin sobbing and hyperventilating once she got to jail.
Yeah.
Which happens a lot. Now, as I said before, this was the O.J. Simpson trial of its day.
Right.
And not just by the fact of how popular or how notorious this case was, but also because her family shelled out a shit ton of money to get her the dream team of lawyers for its day.
Yeah.
She actually had the former governor of Massachusetts as one of her lawyers.
Right. She lawyered up.
She sure did. And the lawyers did some fancy footwork and were able to keep a lot of the line of questioning during the inquest away from the jury or not to be allowed to be submitted to the jury because, as I mentioned before, Lizzie was on morphine during a lot of this time. So that could explain a lot of the reasons why her answers were kind of going back and forth and why she was being a little strange.
And that is interesting to know is they apparently kept her doped up for a strange amount of time.
Yeah, for a long time. Like during all of these questionings, even like days after the murders, she was, high.
She was high, right. That is interesting.
Yeah, like what I was just talking about before, the questioning when she like was weird about just saying she was just sitting in the kitchen and things like that. She was on morphine during that time. So her lawyers were able to keep that away from the jury, and they also were able to keep the testimony from the pharmacist who wouldn't give her the prussic acid that what was mentioned before. That was also kept away from the jury as well because Abby and Andrew Borden were hacked to death and not poisoned to death. So
Right.
they said it wasn't relevant to the case.
Very interesting.
Which could be true, could not be true. Maybe it is relevant. It shows that Lizzie was trying to find a way to commit murder earlier and possibly in a more feminine way.
Right.
Maybe this was very even more premeditated.
Right.
But also, it could be her just trying to buy prussic acid to clean a sealskin cape. I don't know, because that is the thing that people would do.
Right.
So who knows? Now, the case was watched by as many people as they could fit in the courtroom, and they got as many people in there as they possibly could. There were lines way outside, people trying to get in and see, and the case did not disappoint. They actually brought out the skulls. They exhumed Andrew and Abby Borden's bodies to get their skulls and brought them out to show in front of the jury so that they could show where these wounds were inflicted on them. And at this point, apparently, Lizzie fainted.
And apparently, I've also heard that whoever was in charge of, like, the bodies, like the coroner or whoever, was apparently a dumb fuck.
Oh, yeah. They, left the bodies out for way too long. The brains had melted because it was in this, 90-degree house.
They were just, left out. Yeah, whoever was in charge of actually handling the bodies was a fucking moron.
Absolutely. But also, it's hard to know. Maybe that's just what people kind of did back then. That
Right.
I can't really speak to. I just don't know. I don't
That's
really know.
true.
I know that forensic science existed. I just know it was kind of in its early days, suppose. So I don't know exactly how much they knew or how to properly handle a body. I don't know.
Right.
Now, there was a $5,000 reward out for two different things that was put in the newspaper. One was a $5,000 reward for information about the note that it supposedly came for Abby Borden, saying that she wanted to go see, or that her sick friend needed her. Any information about the note, the actual note, anything like that, $5,000, a lot of money at the time, and nobody came forward. Wouldn't you think that if you were Abby Borden's friend, you would want to come forward and say, yeah, Abby was with me at the time?
Especially for that kind of cheddar.
Yeah, exactly. Why wouldn't you? There was also a $5,000 reward out for just information or the whereabouts of the murders of this crime. But this $5,000 reward was set by Emma and Lizzie Borden themselves. So that was kind of like a PR move, in my opinion.
Okay.
Now, when it was time for the jury to make a decision, they only deliberated for 90 minutes. And it's said that they decided pretty much right away, but they stayed in the deliberation room longer just so it kind of seemed like they had really given it some serious thought. When
Right.
really they had already all decided. So Lizzie Borden, in the murders of Andrew Borden and Abby Borden, was found not guilty. A lot of people just assume that she was found guilty because we all think of her as committing this murder, especially because of the jumping rope rhyme, but she was actually acquitted.
And what's interesting to know is the people were also kind of split. There were some people that were convinced she had done it, and then you had people that were literally we should fucking kick the police's ass for tormenting this innocent woman. They were really split. There was also people that literally wanted to run the police out of town because
how dare they do this to this upper class woman?
Right. Clearly they were stumped as to who did it, so they wanted to pin it on someone. People were very divided.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because most of the people that thought that she was innocent were WASPs, were people in her community.
Right.
And the people who thought she was guilty were a lot of these immigrants, these Irish immigrants, these Portuguese immigrants.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's just, it makes sense that it's not surprising that that's how it shook out. But it's still interesting that some people really believed her and some people did not.
Fascinating. Now, here's what I wanted. Just thinking about the logistics of the murders. So if she kills the mother first.
Yeah.
How do you know what the father's going to do? Clearly, they didn't expect him to come home early.
No, but she did expect him to come home.
For lunch or
Yeah,
what?
or for just a rest during the day. He would do that, was normal for him.
Okay.
So she was expecting him to come home. He just came home earlier than she was expecting.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, Lizzie Borden, surprisingly enough, stayed in Fall River until she died on June 1st, 1927. And her sister Emma died just 9 days later.
Oh, wow.
Now, Lizzie and Emma, when Lizzie was originally acquitted, They bought a beautiful house up on the hill, just like they always wanted, and they moved in there, and they had this luxurious home with servants and a chauffeur, and they lived the life that they always wanted to live, and they lived together. But at some point, there was some event that occurred that Emma said she could no longer in good conscience live in the house or something like that.
Okay.
And some people think that it was maybe a homosexual relationship that Lizzie had with this actress friend of hers.
Right.
That started that, or maybe it was something else entirely. Emma really never made any public statement in any direction about why she left, other than that there was something that occurred that she just couldn't stomach anymore.
Right. Or, maybe Lizzie told her what she did, and while she wouldn't give up her sister, she still couldn't live with her. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting about the secret relationship too, because I think I never saw it, but there was that movie they did with like Kristen Stewart.
Oh, and Chloe Sevigny?
Yeah, and I think it played into that, right?
I didn't see it, so I don't know.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I think maybe now we should talk a little bit about theories.
Yes, please.
About what could have happened. Now, the first theory is, did John Morse do this? John Morse was the uncle that was staying at the house.
That's right. Because think about it, it is weird that she chose, if we say she did it, that she chose to do it while they had company.
Yes.
How would you know he could come back at any time? He could
come back, right. But John Morse himself, he actually had an airtight alibi. Some people think it's too airtight, but it's airtight. So he was not there when this occurred. He did not do it. Some people think that maybe was it a random burglary gone wrong or an enemy of Andrew's? Now, the random intruder or a burglary gone wrong, I think is the least likely of any of these.
Right. Well, if a burglar came, killed Abby, and then an hour and a half later just thought, I'll try again.
Right. What's the point? And just hid somewhere? Why wouldn't she just run out of the house?
Clearly, right. So clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and no one was seen running out of the house with blood covered all over them, or no one was seen running out of the house at all other than Bridget later on when she was running to get help.
Right.
So I don't think that makes any sense. Now, it being an enemy of Andrew Borden's, I mean, I guess it's possible, but there's all of these questions of how did this person get in the house when the house was locked up like Fort Knox? Why did this person just kill Abby and Andrew and not the rest of the family? Where did this person stay for the hour and a half between the two murders? How did this person enter the house without anyone noticing? How did this person leave the house without anyone in the neighborhood noticing? I mean, this was like a busy neighborhood. It's not like this was out in the country. This was like they had true next door neighbors.
Right.
No one saw anything. Now, did Bridget do it? But Bridget also, she was not considered to be a suspect because she didn't have a motive for the murder. And she didn't really. There was no reason for her to do this. It really just turned her life totally upside down.
Right.
So then we're left with Lizzie. Do I think Lizzie did it? Yes. Do I think Bridget helped Lizzie or knew that Lizzie did it and helped her cover it up? Maybe. I don't know. The reason why I think that Bridget maybe knew about it or something like that, or knew that Lizzie did it at least, is just because I'm surprised that Bridget didn't hear anything.
Right.
That just seems kind of weird to me. I mean, I guess she was on the third floor and maybe you wouldn't hear those whacks because there wasn't any screaming or anything like that because Andrew Borden was asleep when he was struck by the axe or the hatchet or whatever.
Right. And from what I've heard, didn't they say that that first blow would have probably been enough to kill him? Which is also that, they was whacked so many times, but they think that first hit was enough to actually put him down.
Exactly. I meant to say that too. That's another reason why I feel like the random burglar idea doesn't really make any sense, because this just seems like a crime of passion to me.
Right.
Because the first blow probably would have killed Andrew, but it still whacked 10 or so more times. The first blow, I don't think it killed Abby, but probably the second or the third blow would have.
And she got more hits overall, right?
Yeah, she got like 19. Some of you might be wondering what was the deal with that hatchet that was found in the cellar.
Right.
The handle was broken, so let's think about what was going on there. Was the handle broken maybe because there was blood on the handle and the handle was wood and it was too hard to clean the blood off of. And was that what Lizzie was doing when she was down in the cellar? Was she down there cleaning the blood off of the blade of the hatchet? Was that what she was doing, crouched down by the sink for 1 or 2 minutes? And is that why the hatchet wasn't found initially? Because maybe Lizzie was hiding the hatchet on her person?
Right.
Because the police wouldn't have searched Lizzie. That would not be done at the time.
That's right. That's the other weird thing is like, it was, even if they were a suspect in murder, you didn't, even if you were police, you didn't go through a lady's thing.
Right. So they had to ask permission to go through her things in her room.
Especially maybe if she somehow had it on her, with all these big clothes they wore, if
That's
she
what
had
I
it
think.
on her person.
That's what I think.
Because they're certainly not going to have her take her clothes off.
Exactly. Because they did search her room and they didn't find anything.
Right.
But they didn't pat her down or anything.
Right.
So that's maybe she kept the hatchet on herself that whole time. And then later on, when she had a chance to clean it, she left it down in the cellar, and maybe that was that white kind of ashy substance on it. Was she just rubbed the hatchet on the ground to try to make it look dusty so it didn't look freshly clean?
Right.
But what about all of the blood spatter? I mean, she would be covered in blood
Right.
if she did this. I mean, I'm sure there was some blood on the walls, but the
right.
police, I believe that there wasn't like a ton of blood everywhere.
Right.
So is it possible that she got down to like her underwear and then committed these crimes?
Right. Or even naked. That's the other theories. Maybe she got just stripped
Possibly.
down. Right.
Maybe did she use Andrew's coat as kind of like a shield to protect her from the blood spatter? Because Andrew's coat was in the room.
Right.
So maybe all she had to really do was just wash her hands and her face and just a bowl of water.
Right.
And Bridget was probably outside cleaning the windows when Abby was murdered.
Right.
So that kind of makes sense why she didn't hear of Abby being murdered, because she was outside. And maybe that's why Lizzie was asking, like, oh, are you going to go wash the windows?
Ah.
And then when Bridget didn't go into town to go to that sale that was going on, she went upstairs to the 3rd floor, and maybe that was just good enough for Lizzie and she still committed the crime? Or
Right.
did Bridget hear what Lizzie was doing and she came down and Bridget helped her get redressed and
Right.
everything, and then ran out and did this? I don't know. I think Lizzie definitely did this. Was Bridget involved? I really have no idea. It's possible. But I
Interesting.
definitely think Lizzie did this. This is one of those stories we'll never find out fully what happened. We'll just never know. And that's crazy. But we would love to hear your theories. What do you think happened? Let us know on any of our socials or email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your theories. And Dylan, that is going to wrap us up for Lizzie Borden, the murders.
That's right. Can't wait next week to dive into the haunting.
Yes, please.
But right now, let me read to you some names, our top tier Patreon subscribers, and we have a newcomer.
Yes.
Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Alungfus, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh So Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bone Breaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, and the newcomer, the Maniacal Laura Maynard.
Yes, Laura, thank you so much for joining this celebrated and righteous group of people. We are so happy to have you with us.
We sure are. Laura, I get to occasionally work with her over at Second City. You have as well.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful person. So happy to have her as part of our
Absolutely.
Patreon.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. Please like, rate, subscribe, tell a friend, share us on social media, any of these things. It really does help out the podcast, and we are so, so grateful for all that you do for us.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.